Welcome back, everybody, to Designed in California. When we last left you, we dropped you off in 1976, America's bicentennial. I'm Jason Snell, joined across the pond by one of our old foes in the UK.
Why are we doing this?
Mike
Why is
Hurley.
this what we're doing?
It's a 1776 thing. Don't worry about it. So it is 1976. American patriotism is at its peak. But also, the computer industry is being born. Now, when we last left you in 1976, Steve Jobs had tried to shop Apple around to lots of different companies ineffectively. Perhaps it was the smell or the bare feet. Perhaps it was that nobody really valued two kids in their garage with a computer. He had turned down Commodore before they could turn him down for his kind of ridiculously overhyped request for money.
Yep.
And so it's all kind of hanging there. What are they going to do? Now, I want to talk, we're going to back up just for a moment. A little bit before Commodore came knocking on the garage door, the guy with the cowboy hat, and talk about sort of like the beginning of the Apple II and the partnership. So,
Okay.
Woz and Jobs fly to Philadelphia on TWA, an airline that no longer exists, but it does put us in the 70s mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Flying to Philly en route to Atlantic City on the red eye. Atlantic City is the home of a computer show called PC 76.
Whoa, I love it.
And they're nervous because there's buzz around a competitor from a company called Processor Technology, who sounds very professional,
Mm-hmm.
which is funny when I tell stories from this era because you're like, yeah, but it's not going to go well for them, is it? Because I've never heard of them. But they were very impressive. The computer is called the Sol. It's going to be announced. It is yet another company founded in a garage. This time it was a garage in Berkeley,
Right.
so in the East Bay and not the South Bay, by members of the Homebrew Club. So
Okay.
it's like...
So this goes back to what I was saying last time, right? Like there were just a bunch of companies like Apple, and they're all kind of like circling around at this time. And so
Yeah.
really any of them could have been the ones.
And Processor Technology got money, right? Like they, unlike Apple, they had
Right.
money. They hired a corporate sales staff. They had people in suits and stuff.
Okay. So just to set the stage here, I want to make sure that I got it correctly. So PC 76, this trade show, this actually happened before Commodore made the offer.
Yeah,
to them.
I have to back us up a little bit to tell you about this Apple II part of it. I'm like
Yeah.
a time traveler, Mike. We're going to move
I love
around a
it.
little bit in
We're
order to
gonna
get you
have to move around. Yeah.
to get all these threads in order.
This
So
is-
Woz,
This is the story, Jason. If
Yeah.
it's a story, you can't just go chronologically. We've got to
no,
jump
it's
around.
you gotta. It needs to be told in the order that it needs to be
you
told in.
said.
So Woz is designing the Apple II at this time, right?
Okay.
Like the Apple I was his previous project. He moved on immediately. He knew all the things that could be better about it. But Apple is still trying to move those Apple I's, right? I said last time they didn't sell a lot of them. So they're going to go to this show and they're going to try to sell a bunch of Apple I's. Steve Jobs knows they need to be there. He knows they need to see the Sol because that is their competition. A competition for whatever Woz is working on next. And they're going to secretly show some people what the Apple II is going to do and how it's going to beat the Sol.
Okay. Now, as far as we know, this would be their first trade show, their first something like this?
I think so. I think this is their first anything that resembles a trade show at all. The Homebrew Computer Club was probably, I mean, there maybe were like clubs and stuff, but this is a
Sure.
real trade show. Not
With
what we think
buyers
of
and all
today,
this kind
but
of stuff. Yeah.
I mean, it's a hobbyist. It's probably, I would say, think of it like a cross between like a flea market and like a hobbyist expo of like
Okay.
very niche parts. It's not a big business yet, but there's a lot of interest in this growing area. So it's it was probably pretty shambolic, but for this era, it is the first trade show I think that they show up at.
Okay.
And now, so guess who's on the flight? This TWA flight, sitting right behind Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. It's Processor Technology who make the Sol.
Okay.
So they're all dressed in a corporate fashion, far more corporate than the Apple people, which is as why I've established a very low bar.
Yes.
But their computer, the Sol, it looks like a real computer. It's got a keyboard and a motherboard and a tape drive, all in one metal case. It's a productized computer.
Was this... what am I saying here? Hold on. So this is the all-in-one. We touched on the all-in-one before. We spoke about the Commodore PET, which came a little bit later.
Yeah. This doesn't have a display.
Okay.
But it does have, I mean, it's not what the Apple I was, which was a loose circuit board that you had to add stuff to.
Okay.
This is you buy this box, it comes in a metal case, it looks like it looks like a piece of industrial equipment. And it's got the keyboard and the motherboard and your storage drive all together. All you have to do is hook it up to power and a display, and you're good to go. It looks like a product in a way that so many of these products, including the Apple I, they just weren't products really. They were part of a kit.
But it
feels
feels
like
like
product.
This is what people were shooting for at this time, trying to build a computer that was one box. Essentially.
Yeah, this is the next step, and
Right.
everybody knows it. Steve Jobs certainly knows it. Woz says that he knew that it was processor technology behind them on this flight because of how they talked. He said to Walter Isaacson, "We could hear them talking in advanced business talk using business-like acronyms we'd never heard before."
I will always love Steve Wozniak. And the reason is because I believe even at this point, Steve Wozniak doesn't know what any of these words mean.
No. So one of the prime movers behind the Sol is Lee Felsenstein, who was the spiritual father of the Homebrew Computer Club.
Okay.
And he does a little peek over the seat to see what Jobs and Woz are doing. And they're messing around with this computer mock-up they have in a cigar box. And in Michael Moritz, who wrote the book Return to the Little Kingdom, described the prototype as forlorn and savagely deformed. A printed circuit board screwed to a wooden base with wires sneaking between the chips. It was a loser. Ha ha. Lee Felsenstein peeks over the seat. He sees the stupid, forlorn computer in a cigar box. Oh, we have a metal case on our computer. We have salespeople in suits. These guys are not a serious threat. And by the way, that mock-up is the Apple II, and it will destroy processor technology.
So I'm aware of the Apple II. I know what it is, right? Like I've used one. I have a sense of understanding it. But I am looking forward as we go through this series to understanding exactly why it was so much better than everything else. Because it must have been so good to have come from these kinds of beginnings and destroy products that ostensibly sound to me in the way that you describe them as just what the Apple II was.
Yeah, it is more technically advanced. We'll get into this in a moment. It is more technically advanced, but this is the story of Apple at this point, right? Which is that they're so unpolished that nobody takes them seriously, even though what's actually happening is that their technology is incredible because Woz is a genius. And the first person who recognizes that is going to make a lot of money. Right?
Yeah.
The first person who recognizes the genius, if they can recognize it before they go out of business, will make a lot of money because they are super technically proficient thanks to Woz, but they do not have their act together otherwise.
No.
So this show in Atlantic City was not that interesting.
Also, just one last thing about the difference
sure.
between the 70s and today. They were allowed to do that sitting on an airplane.
Oh,
they
yeah.
had a thing in a cigar box with chips and wires. But if
Yeah,
if you got that out
No.
on the plane, you're going out the door. It doesn't matter. They're putting a parachute on you and you're out of there.
No, anything goes on these planes. So we get to Atlantic City, right? Flying to Philly, go to Atlantic City, New Jersey. The show is not that interesting because all they have is the Apple I out on the show floor, and they sell some of them, which is great and all.
Yeah.
This is Atlantic City before they brought in gambling and casinos. So it's super run down and dilapidated. The hotel that this event is in and that they're staying in has like holes in its walls and stuff. Like it sounds really bad. There are elderly people who live in this hotel who are like watching these long-haired hippie types in the elevators and in the hallways, and they're like, who are they? Why are they here? It sounds like a complete, I mean, it actually sounds kind of like a sitcom. But forget about PC-76. At night, up in their hotel room, Woz has hooked his Apple II up to the TV set in the room, which at least the hotel had a TV set in the room.
Yeah.
I thought. And has it like spraying color graphics all over the screen. And again, when I talk about the Commodore PET, like it didn't have color or graphics. Apple II, color graphics. And everybody who came into that room that they let peek at what Apple was working on realized that they had something beyond what anybody else was doing. And Jobs knew it, and Woz knew it. And this is the moment when Commodore came knocking on the garage door with a cowboy hat, and Steve Jobs made his outrageous demands. After seeing everybody's reactions and what they knew about what the Apple II prototype in a cigar box that looked forlorn, yes, but they knew they were way ahead. They weren't ahead in making it a product yet, but I think they knew that the Apple II was a next generation computer, if you will, from what was coming out. That Sol was a nice computer and all, but it was, and that Commodore PET ultimately would be too, but they lacked stuff that the Apple II was going to have, and that put them ahead. And I think that's why Steve Jobs made those outrageous demands to Commodore.
Okay.
And I think because Steve believed in this, and I think was always a little more self-deprecating about it and didn't value himself as much, it actually led to possibly the biggest conflict the two of them ever had.
Huh. Now, this is very interesting. So it feels like the perfect time for us to take a quick break.
I think so. What will happen next? Find out after the break.
Thank you so much for listening to this preview episode of Design in California. We hope you're enjoying it. We're outside Apple Park right now.
We are.
It's WWDC week. And so we've been getting together, we've been working real hard this week, and all week we've been having people coming up to us, congratulating us about the success we've had with the Kickstarter campaign. So we should thank you, because you've made that happen for us. We are blown away with the success that we've had so far, and it's enabling us to do so much for the show, right, Jason?
Yeah, that's right. So we've got some stretch goals, we've got some big plans for the coming year of episodes and beyond, honestly. And so, at 175, we're going to add some more variations on our theme from Chris Breen. We're going to order some more original artwork. You haven't even seen the first original artwork. We haven't even seen some of the first original artwork, but that's something we're working on. And then at $200,000, things get really crazy.
Yeah, we want to do an event, a Designed in California event of some description in both San Francisco and London at some point, probably in the first year of the show.
Yeah.
We're not sure exactly what they're going to be yet. They will at least be meetups. I would like there to be at least one of those be a live show.
Yeah, we'll see.
But we've got a lot of work to try and work out how that's going to come together.
We've only been doing this for a week and a half.
Yes.
So.
And this obviously, it being a stretch goal, right now it's just a dream.
Yeah.
It's a dream. That may happen.
Yeah.
But no matter what happens, this show is happening, and that's the thing we're so excited about. We're obviously really busy here at WWDC this week. We hope that you enjoyed Upgrade on Monday. But once we get back home, we're full steam ahead on planning this show and making it the best it can be for you.
Absolutely. So thanks to those who have supported us. There will be more stuff happening this month.
Yep.
You have plenty of opportunity if you want to look at some of the new information and some of the various higher tiers. You could upgrade your pledge. If you are still thinking whether you want to support it or not, you've got time. You've got till the end of the month. We would appreciate your support. The money that goes into this project will help us make it better, and we're really excited to get started with that.
But if you can't, don't forget this will be a show that's available for everyone. Like there will be a free version of this show when it launches later in the year. So however you can support the show, whether that's by tuning in, by sharing it, or by going to the design.fm and signing up for the Kickstarter campaign, it all makes a massive difference.
And most importantly, thank you for listening, and we hope you're enjoying these sample episodes. They're only running to the end of the month. Don't
Yes.
worry, we're not going to be posting 2 upgrades every week forever, just through the end of the month.
Yes. And Upgradians Plus, thank you for your continued support. Don't forget to check in the show notes for your secret links. This will get you discounts off our higher level tiers, so any of the tiers that come with physical rewards and up. As we've mentioned before, if you've already backed the campaign, you should check these out. You may be able to get more for the same amount of money even. We just want to give something back to you for your continued support of us. Thank you so much.
That's it. Now back to the show.
All right, so welcome back to Designed in California. And so in the timeline now, we've gone to the computer show, PC 76.
PC 76, USA, USA.
It's the bicentennial. We're aware
Yep.
of that, which is really good news for everyone.
Yep. Statue of Liberty, boats, flags,
Brilliant. Love it.
fireworks.
Fantastic. USA. And so people are aware of what Apple's building. The word is getting out about the Apple II.
Slowly, yeah, they're very slowly revealing to people that they've got something here. But they're still
Commodore's
selling
come
Apple
knocking.
ones. Yeah.
Steve Jobs made his demands. But then Steve says, you know what? Forget about this Commodore.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
not doing
they're
this.
shady. We're not going to go with them.
Okay.
So, just to remind everybody, Apple Computer Company is a partnership. It's not an incorporated company yet, as we talked about at the end of our Apple at 50 episode. That didn't happen until 77. It was a partnership registered April 1st, 76. And when Ron Wayne got cold feet, he backed out of his 10% tiebreaker share. It's 50-50 between the two Steves. But part of the agreement of the partnership is that Woz owns the rights to his creations. It's more of a marketing and distribution and productizing partnership than it is a full-on intellectual property agreement. This is not a corporation that Woz has contributed his intellectual property to, and as a result, Woz owns his stuff. The stuff that Steve is trying to sell is owned by Woz.
I don't think this was smart.
Well, as we're going to discover, I think that it was a smart move from Jobs in that it may have been the only way that he could have gotten Apple to happen. That
Okay.
Woz was not prepared to be giving away the fruit of his labor, especially if he was still
Okay.
kind of like dreaming about. He's still working at HP. He's still dreaming about selling this to HP or someone else. I think. But you can also see the friction this might lead to if Jobs is trying to sell the company for a lot of money and it's a 50-50 partnership, but the underlying technology is really their greatest asset and that's owned by Woz. Steve Jobs, has he earned the 50%? This is going to be
Not
an
at this
issue.
point. Not at this point.
Not yet. He will,
Yeah.
but not yet. And that is part of the issue here. So
Yep.
Woz, again, he does his own thing. He follows his muse. He builds his technological creations. But over the last year, as they've been talking about what the Apple II is going to be, he's been arguing with Steve Jobs. It's this push and pull between a product visionary and a technical visionary about what the end result should be. Expansion slots so that you can add cards later to a computer to make it do different things. Woz wants 8 of them. Jobs wants 2 of them. You'll never need more than 2 for a printer and a modem, I think he said. Woz is like, no, it needs to be 8. Woz wins that argument, by the way. But you can see why there might be tension between them. Steve Jobs is kind of an assassin of joy, right? It's like Woz is like, I made this thing, and Steve's like, no, that's too many things. I don't want that. Because there's a push and pull here. Woz is floating free and inventing what he wants, and Steve Jobs, we know already at this point, has some product sense, and he's like, I don't want to do that. I do want to do this. And if you're Woz, you're pushing against that. You're maybe not used to having a partner who is going to push back on what you want to do with your technology and with your designs. And then on top of that, Steve Jobs is now standing in the way of the nice people at Commodore, shady, but the nice people at Commodore who maybe want to offer money for Woz's invention, but Steve overprices it and walks away. And then even if they had gotten paid, Steve would take half the money.
Do you think Woz saw it that way? Do you think that the money or anything like this was something that bothered Woz to that degree?
I don't know. Woz doesn't seem super money oriented, but at the same time, he's always had more money than God, basically, since Apple was a success. And so maybe back then he was more concerned about it. I don't.
Maybe
I
the
think
money
it's pride.
is more of a symbol of ownership as opposed to actually what it buys you.
I think it's pride. I think it's that he is the creator, and has inscribed a lot of value
Okay.
into what he creates. He was also demoralized in Atlantic City. Steve Jobs was gleeful. He realized what we said earlier. Woz's designs were way ahead of the Sol.
Yep.
And Jobs is thinking about the power of that nice all-in-one computer case that the Sol came in. Jobs, I think in this period, when they go to Atlantic City, when they get the offer from Commodore, or make the offer to Commodore, I guess, Jobs at this point, I think, sees the path to success for Apple.
So he's like, if we can put our incredible machine inside one of these cases, we blow everybody away.
Yeah. And so that's the vision of the future. And maybe it's literally glass half full, glass half empty, but Woz looks at processor technology and he says, well, they're a real company. They got their salespeople wear suits. They're like HP, a real legitimate company. Woz is working with teenagers and people in their early 20s. Remember, he's in his mid-20s. His business partner never showers. What is he doing here? Maybe he should just take his inventions, which he owns, and go somewhere better. And just to be clear about the difference in age between them, because we think of them as a pair. Steve Jobs is much younger than Steve Wozniak. Woz is married. He's spending late nights working on this Apple stuff. While also working at HP. His wife feels neglected. His family is concerned that the schlunky-looking guy with dirty hair and bare feet, that's an actual quote from Woz's sister, is exploiting their innocent genius brother, trying to get him to quit his good job and neglect his marriage. It is a bad dynamic, especially when you consider everybody around Steve Wozniak.
Didn't know Woz was married at this point.
Yeah.
I always think of them as two young single guys. Is how I've
No,
always
Woz
imagined
is
them.
26 and married, newly married. His first wife.
Okay.
He's had many.
Oh.
So bad dynamic. Schlunky looking guy with dirty hair and bare feet. Right. Woz's sister says that.
Not great.
Then Steve Jobs withdraws from the Commodore deal before they can even find out if there's an offer to be made or a counter offer to be made.
Yeah.
That money could have paid off debts. Could have gotten Wozniak a sweet job building his dream computer. Remember, he couldn't even go to college for more than a year at a time because he couldn't afford it. He had to go back and work and make money to pay for another year of college.
I think it is very clear, and has been clear across this story so far, that, to me at least, Woz doesn't care if he owns the business that is producing this computer. He would have given it all to HP if they would have said yes.
Yes.
It was purely about, who will let me build this? He doesn't care if he's building it.
He wants to build it, and he wants to I think he wants that to be his job, right? That's the living the dream of now me making this computer is what I do, not what I moonlight at while I am working on whatever HP is doing.
Although I think he does like the idea of wherever he builds it, that you have some control over it. In the sense that he will argue with Jobs about how many slots there are. He wants to be a decision maker.
I think that there is a little bit of innocence here, right? Where he's thinking, if a legitimate business will enable me to make these computers, which I love doing, and that'll be my job, and it'll be a legitimate corporation with benefits and an office, and I can go in and all of that. That's the dream. Part of that dream is probably a little more innocently I will control this and still have my freedom to do this. But the fact is, whatever pushback Steve Jobs is giving him, if he got consumed by a big corporation and was given a whole management structure and stuff, it would have been way worse, right?
Yeah.
It would have been a rude awakening, I think. But I don't think
doesn't know this yet.
Yeah, I don't think he's thinking like that. So what's Steve Wozniak going to do? All of us know Woz is a teddy bear of a man. He is proud, for certain. He is a little needy of recognition, but he's a sweetheart. There's no doubt about it. Through and through, he's a sweetheart. And I can say from personal experience, as somebody who discovered fairly late in life, when I was in my 40s, that I am a textbook conflict avoider. I recognize Woz's whole vibe here.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Game recognizes game.
I recognize. It's like, yeah, I have some issues, but I'm not going to start. Can I avoid this conflict? Mike, you know who's not a conflict avoider?
Okay.
Steve's dad, Jerry.
Okay.
Jerry
Welcome to the show,
Wozniak.
Jerry Wozniak.
Welcome. He's burst in like the Kool-Aid man. He was an electrical engineer at Lockheed for his entire life. Now, I'm going to read something that Michael S. Malone wrote in his excellent book, Infinite Loop. And I agree with this, but it definitely comes from a perspective, which is he's trying to explain how Jerry Wozniak views the world. This is what Malone says. Jerry Wozniak was as naive about the true nature of business as his son, like we were saying.
Mm-hmm.
He was a good man and a good father, but a lousy businessman. R&D always believes it makes the real contribution to a company's success, while management merely follows behind, sweeping up the credit. Management knows better, but is forever embarrassed about not being clever enough to work on the new inventions in the lab.
Huh.
So it's this classic, right? Like, whatever part of the business you're in, you think it's the most important part of the business, and everybody else is stealing your thunder. And what Malone is saying about Jerry Wozniak is, from Jerry Wozniak's perspective, as an electrical engineer, the engineers are the people who create all the value for the company, and everything else is just sort of sucking on that value and taking all the credit and taking all the money, which is, I mean, that's a real dynamic. I've seen that in my career too. You know, the salespeople who at the company I worked for, they looked at their sales figures and said, well, all the money the company makes is from us, so we're the most important part. And all the editorial people were like, well, we create the product that the salespeople sell into, and if the product didn't exist, there'd be nothing to sell. We're the most important part of the company.
Yeah.
And the danger is if you really go down that path and think, I have all the value and you have none. That's the danger. And what Malone is saying is, this seemed to be what Jerry Wozniak felt about that dynamic between his son and this barefoot guy, Steve Jobs.
Not sure whether at this point, but definitely at points in their relationship, this is exactly how Jobs and Wozniak feel about each other.
Yeah.
Wozniak will believe that he has all of the technology and the technical skill is all that matters, and Jobs will believe he has all of the business and marketing ideas, and that is all that matters.
Yeah, so this is not, I want to be clear as I tell the rest of this story. This is not the first fight between the Steves. They've argued about product stuff before. Mm-hmm. However, this is the most important one.
Okay.
And it has ramifications for the rest of their relationship. So Jerry Wozniak decides he's not a conflict avoider. He's going to do something about this. And he tells his son, Mark Wozniak, he's going to confront Steve Jobs. And this is his plan. This is a quote that Mark Wozniak has verified. I'm going to make the little son of a bitch cry, and that'll be the end.
Okay. So Jerry's got it out for Jobs.
Yeah. And so one September evening in 1976 at the Wozniak's house, Jerry Wozniak springs into action, and he tells Steve Jobs, quote, because, again, overheard by Mark Wozniak, you don't deserve shit. You haven't produced anything. You haven't done anything. Now, to Steve Jobs' credit, while he did, as predicted, absolutely burst into tears.
So congrats to Jerry Wozniak, then. He did what he set out to do.
He also told Jerry Wozniak he didn't appreciate everything he'd done for the company. And he told Woz, look, if we're not 50-50, you can just have the whole thing. He calls their bluff. He says, if you believe I have no value, take it. But I believe this is a 50-50 partnership. And Michael Malone's book, which is, again, it's out of print. Somebody bring it back in print. It's such a good book. His accounting of this moment is so great. Steve Jobs, he says, this kid with the least amount of work experience in the room was the one who was right. Malone says, his 50% share might be stretching things a bit after the first 6 months, but would be low in light of things to come. In the ever-repeating story of high-tech, engineering leads only for the first few months of a new revolution, and thereafter, marketing is king. Moreover, if there hadn't been a Wozniak, Jobs would have found somebody else. Without Jobs, Wozniak would still be a low-grade engineer at Hewlett-Packard. Now, Brutal. Maybe not wrong. What I would say is I don't think Steve Jobs was ever going to find another Wozniak. He might have found another muse, another technical person, but I don't think they would have ever possibly been as brilliant as Steve Wozniak. I don't think that actually would have happened. As for the other part, I think there's some truth in that. As brilliant as Steve Wozniak was, I'm not sure, given everything we know about him, especially up to now, he was ever going to be visible enough to his employers for them to see his genius. And he might have been content to work on his tinkering out of the office and then just kind of put in the work at the job during the day.
Well,
so we'll never know.
He would do important things at his job because somebody recognized he was good, but he was never going to wrestle for the credit of them.
Yeah, I think that's the point, is that he was a genius, but maybe a bit of a pushover.
Yeah.
And that would he have succeeded in a corporate environment? Would he have been allowed to flourish in the way? Maybe. And if somebody had identified the Apple II and had been like, oh my God, and they had bought the design and put him to work building an HP computer or whatever, maybe he would have ended up being a rock star. He certainly had rock star talent, but would he have stood out? I don't know.
Yeah, I think time tells, even at this point, but time as we go into the future tells that Woz is a pushover. Like, unfortunately, that is part of his personality. I don't know if he knows it at this point, but Jobs obviously eventually learns it and pushes Woz over and pushes him to the point that he will leave.
Yeah. So this is a really sad moment. Malone's book says that this argument is like a crossing of the Rubicon. According to Randy Wigginton, who was one of those teenagers working for Apple at the time, in a different book called Icon by Young and Simon, Randy Wigginton said the friendship between Woz and Jobs dissolved in that period. By the time of the Apple II's introduction, there was not much pretense left.
Ooh.
So
that's sad. It didn't really last very long from this point then, really, did it?
Yeah, the Apple II wasn't even finished yet. Not even close. Apple Computer hadn't even been incorporated yet. It's still 1976. It's only like 6 months after they registered the company.
I'm getting so... I appreciate that because it's hard to keep the timeline. Because I think doing this show so far, and one of the reasons that I wanted us to do this show together is because so much happens so fast.
It does.
That it's reductive in the way that a lot of these stories are told. Because there's so little time that is passing that
and so many
enough
different
time is used to unpack it all.
Yeah, and so many different things are happening simultaneously. It's one of the reasons why I do sometimes sort of skip forward and back, is I'm trying to follow these narrative threads. And if you did it just chronologically, it would be a mess. I'm trying to follow these individual threads. So in this case, yes, it's all happened so fast. We haven't even gotten back to the point where we left our Apple at 50 episode, actually, because there's so much else going on here. So I think this is basically the end of the tight childhood-esque relationship between Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. From this point on, they are business partners, not really friends. It's sad to think about that, but it was almost immediately, they went into business together, at which point they really were business partners and not friends. So, by the way, for all of the ultimatum of Woz's dad, they didn't dissolve the partnership.
No. I mean, Jobs clearly pulled something off in that moment.
Yeah, he called their bluff.
Yeah,
and Steve Wozniak was not willing to walk away from the partnership.
But at the same time,
it ruptured their friendship.
And it may have kind of taught Jobs a lesson at that moment, because maybe he was a little bit scared of Jerry.
Yeah. So after all this, guess what? We're back to Mike Markkula again.
Finally.
Keep mentioning him.
Welcome back, Mike.
Welcome back to the show, Mike Markkula. Apple has now failed to sell itself.
Okay.
Venture capitalist Don Valentine.
Now. They're done now. We're trying to sell this company.
Yeah.
That's the end of it. Okay.
Yeah, venture capitalist Don Valentine, who Jobs had been referred to by Nolan Bushnell at Atari. So like they go to Atari and Bushnell's like, no. You put the feet on the president's desk. It's not going to work. But he says, go talk to Don Valentine. He's a VC. Maybe he'll help. Don Valentine referred to Apple as renegades from the human race. That was the line. But even Valentine was like, they're clueless, but they're kind of charming, these kids. Maybe they're worth a shot in the dark. I'm not going to invest in them, but I know someone who might be interested. So he's looking through his mental Rolodex. It's 1976. It might be an actual Rolodex.
It's not a metaphor in 76.
No, it's like an actual like metal thing
It's
with
the
cards
real
in
thing.
it with
Yeah.
people's names on them. For a marketing-focused expert, he's thinking, who could get their act together, right? Think about how the Saul has a whole sales force with suits, and then there's
Yep.
Steve Jobs. A marketing-focused expert might be able to bring them into the real world where they wouldn't be renegades for the human race. And he suggests Mike Markkula.
Okay.
Don Valentine knows Mike Markkula. This is the chain that leads to Apple. It's quite an interesting causal chain, which is Steve Jobs worked at Atari. He knew Nolan Bushnell, who was the CEO, who recommended Don Valentine, the VC, who did not want to invest in them, but thought enough to refer them to somebody, kind of felt bad that he was going to just say no, and says, why don't you talk to Mike Markkula? Mike Markkula also sees something in these two guys. He gets a demo of that Apple II that Woz is working on, and he decides, let's build a business plan. He sets sales goals. He invests some of his own money. He gets the company a $250,000 line of credit at Bank of America. And, as we've established before, on January 3rd, 1977, the actual 50th anniversary of Apple Computer, they file incorporation papers for Apple Computer Incorporated. This is the real birthday. And so with Mike Markkula on the scene, Apple can be a company. What they're going to need is a product. And that product is going to be the Apple II. But what is it going to be, Mike? What are they going to put in front of people that is going to sell better than the Apple I, which you had to put in a cigar box?
Well, that is the question we will answer on the next episode of Design in California, so people can look forward to that. I did just want to note about Markkula as well. And again, now something I feel like I can reflect on, knowing much more of the history, is that at this point, the Steves needed Markkula as somebody who could maybe sit between them. Because clearly at this point, their relationship has changed. And so having a third person in the business from a leadership perspective was probably pretty important for them to be able to continue moving forward.
I think that's probably right. That there's, we always talk about him as adult supervision, and there's some truth in that, but also it changes the dynamic from the two people pushing against each other to having a third person in the room to side with one or the other, or allow them to take some of their duties off of their shoulders, to have Steve Jobs not have to carry the burden of the entire company, but just think about the product, which is a much more Steve Jobs kind of thing. So next time, we will dive in to the rise of the Apple II.